Greetings from wine country, everyone. This is Mark Blanchard with Blanchard Family Wines, and I am happy to announce the first episode of our new wine talk show that we are calling Decanted. And what better first guest to showcase on our first episode than my brother, James Blanchard. Good evening, James. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Mark, how are you doing tonight?
I am excellent. I'm really excited to tell everyone about this idea that we came up with, this idea of this talk show, Decanted. And this show was really inspired by a few different concepts. So Blanchard Family Wines was started, of course, by my brother James and myself about 11, almost 12 years ago. And during that time, of course, we have hosted thousands and thousands of people in person, mainly right here where I'm sitting inside of our winery in Healdsburg, Sonoma County, California. I am sitting in our tasting room where I have sat with countless people in person, tasting wine and having some of the most surprising and insightful and meaningful conversations of my life while tasting wine with, well, sometimes complete strangers. But over the last 13 months, due to COVID, we had to shift our business in many different drastic ways. One of the great concepts that we came up with was moving towards a virtual wine tasting model. In fact, over the last 13 months, we have hosted about 175 virtual wine tastings for probably close to 3,000 people. And through those virtual wine tastings, we have also had some of the most incredible experiences tasting wine and talking to people all over the country. So I was inspired by these concepts, and I came up with this idea of, wouldn't it be great to talk to some of the most interesting people that I know over a virtual setting like this while we tasted wine? And I have some great guests lined up, artists and writers and filmmakers, and I couldn't be more excited about it. But I thought it was very fitting for our first episode that I interviewed my brother, my business partner, James Blanchard. But to keep things a little interesting, we're actually going to interview each other. We each have a series of questions that we don't know ahead of time. This is going to be candid, that we're going to ask each other and see what kind of conversation we can open up. Because after all, that's where the name of our talk show comes from, Decanted. When you decant a bottle of wine, the whole idea is to let it breathe, give it some air to open that wine up. So my hope is here, James and I are going to taste a little wine together, and we're going to see if we can't open up an interesting conversation. Speaking of which, James, what are you tasting on tonight?
Well, Mark, I'm drinking a little bit of our 2017 Russian River Valley Pinot Noir. Beautiful wine, a little bit bigger and bolder than some of our Pinots we've done in the past, a little spice on the back end, but you know, it's another cold evening here in Denver and in probably the mid 30s. So it's nice to sit back with a little glass of red wine.
Nice. No, that's a great one. I'm actually drinking a wine from our 2017 vintage as well. The wine I am tasting tonight is the 2017 Cash Allen Cabernet Sauvignon. This is actually a brand new release. It's my favorite wine we have in our portfolio right now. And those of you that are viewing us right now that maybe aren't that familiar with some of our wines, the Cash Allen Cabernet is, of course, named after James's second born son, Cash Allen, that I believe is 11 years old now. Yeah, I can always remember how old Cash is because he was born the same year we started Blanchard Family Wines, and we are on year 11, so that means Cash Allen must be 11 himself. And I love this wine. I'm really excited about it. I actually spent a whole 3 years aging in the barrel. It's actually a slight blend of Cabernet Sauvignon with about 5% Merlot and 5% Malbec in the mix. So it's a wine that our winemaker Gene and I are very passionate about, very excited about, and it is a brand new release. In fact, we bottled this wine I think 2 weeks ago. So we're really
we haven't gotten this wine yet here in Colorado yet, Mark. I know it's on its way, so we can't wait to taste some of this wine. But what's interesting as well about this wine, this is actually the third release of this wine. It's not common to have 3 releases of the same wine, but this is the third 2017 Cabernet that we've made, all from the same original batch. What makes this wine, I guess, so unique from the other two, and what should I expect from a flavor profile a little bit differently when I get this wine here?
Well, and that is the interesting thing about this wine. So about a year or so ago, we bottled and released a 2017 Cash Allen Cabernet, but we didn't bottle all of the 2017 vintage that we made. We actually held back some. And a few months ago, I actually sent some of that wine out to Colorado. You put it in the kegs and you put it on tap, but we continue to age some of it even longer than that, tinkered with the blend even more. Put the wine through a pretty serious filtration process that we had never done before. And basically, this wine that I'm tasting now that you're going to have on your menu any day now in Colorado, James, and I can't wait for you to try this, because this has been a work in progress for 3 years and the third version of 2000 Cabernet Sauvignon that we've ever made. So aged in oak, like I said, for 3 full years. The blend that we made was something we've been working on for quite a while. So I feel like, we perfected it. This is the third version, and I think we reached perfection with this final version of the wine. And again, I can't wait for you to try it. You're going to be excited about it.
I'm looking forward to it as well. I know, the last 2017 Cabernet we thought would last for quite a while. It didn't. We've got, I think, maybe 1.5 kegs of it left. So we're going to be out of that wine here in the next week and a half. So we're looking forward to get some new stock in.
Good thing I'm ready to send you some more, because this is going to be a hit wine in Colorado, and I guarantee it's going to be a hit wine here in California as well. But on that note, I think we should probably get the show started here. And James, why don't you start us off? As we go forward with this Decanted talk show, I'm going to be interviewing various guests, and I'm going to be the one asking all the questions. So I think it'd be fun to start this first episode with you asking me a question.
You got it, Mark. I'd love to. So, I think some of this series, obviously, we're going to learn a little bit about our guests, but throughout it, our guests are going to learn about us as well. Our customers and fans are going to learn a little bit about us. And certainly they know a little bit about our background already. But one of the things that people that don't know us that well don't quite understand is we didn't come from a wine background. People always say, oh, you're a family winery. Oh, did your parents start this? Did your grandparents start this? Absolutely not. Mark and I started this from scratch ourselves with, you've always got some backing behind you, a little bit of family help. But this is Mark and I's baby that we put together on our own. When we grew up, we didn't grow up with any wine background whatsoever. We didn't see wine on our table growing up. Our parents didn't drink wine. We didn't drink wine out at restaurants. We didn't know a darn thing about wine until we both got to college. That being said, obviously our upbringing is important to us. And so I want you to comment a little bit about how the fact that we grew up in a household that had no wine knowledge whatsoever, but did have a lot of different cultural influences, particularly an Asian background from our mother's side. So we were exposed to a lot of different cultures, a lot of different flavors, a lot of different aromas, a lot of different experiences, even though they didn't revolve around wine. So how do you feel that upbringing and background shaped you as a winemaker and vintner, or us as a company as a whole?
Wow, what an interesting concept and question, really. So I feel like, the biggest aspect of our unique childhood, our unique upbringing was, as you said, our mother is from Hong Kong. So James and I are half Chinese. And, growing up in Peoria, Illinois with, a Chinese mother and an interracial family was a unique experience on many levels. And I think shaped me as a person on many levels. But in a weird way, I think it really did have an influence in a certain philosophy and mentality that I took with me into the wine industry. And I'll tell you what was the biggest impact. One might think it has to do with, certain cultural influence or culinary influence, but really, if anything, the biggest influence was an open-mindedness. So when we were kids, growing up with the Chinese mom, and of course, being introduced to, different aspects of culture outside of just Midwestern American culture, but definitely, different food, for example. And, we spent some time when we were younger traveling to Hong Kong and traveling to China. And, when you're a kid and you're going to a foreign country and you're experiencing a foreign culture and eating foreign food, you have to have an open mind. You have to be be bold and brave, and especially with food. Now, I love Chinese food, but as a kid growing up in America and then all of a sudden going to Hong Kong and China and discovering food I'd never seen before or even heard of before, I learned pretty quickly either be brave in the food that I eat or go hungry. And very quickly, I realized the joy in being open-minded about experiencing that new culture, and especially, again, those new foods. In fact, James, I don't know if you remember when we were kids, there was a point where, we were in Hong Kong and China with our Chinese family. And for me, it became this challenge to try something I'd never tried before. I remember, telling our uncles and aunts when we'd go to restaurants, order the weirdest thing on the menu. I want to try the dish I've never had before. When I discovered the world of wine, it was this epiphany, this realization of how vast and broad and endless the world of wine can be. And having a narrow mind, and when you're a wine drinker, to me, defeats the purpose of what it is to discover wine. Having that open-mindedness in wine, being willing to try anything in the world of wine, I think is a valuable lesson that I kind of took from our childhood. Again, when you were younger, it was go to that restaurant and order the food I'd never heard of. Now, when I go wine tasting, when I go to a fellow winery here in California, my whole thing is I want to try the wine I've never tried before. I want to try the wine I've never heard of before. So I think, that influence we had in the family we grew up in just sort of trained us to be open-minded in life. And for me, it translated into a really open mind in wine drinking. And, I'm grateful that we had that upbringing and that experience. Aren't you?
I think that's a great way of looking at things, Mark. You got to keep trying, trial and error. This Pinot that I've got right here was a trial. We've gone through a few iterations of this until we got it right. And in fact, I opened this bottle yesterday, and I think it's tasting better today than it did yesterday. You wouldn't know that if you didn't try.
That's funny because the cab I'm drinking, I opened yesterday too.
So on that note, Mark, why don't you throw something at me and let me see if I can try and answer for you.
Well, my first question has a little bit to do with our background, but specifically your background, and not a family influence, but a career influence. Many of our real, devoted fans over the years and our wine club members maybe know a little bit of your background, but I think a lot of our newer fans, especially there in Colorado and the Denver area, don't really know your story, specifically your Air Force career. So those of you that are viewing this right now that don't know the story, James was a graduate of the Air Force Academy, 1998, graduated as an officer. From there, spent 20 years as an officer, mainly flying helicopters, and retired as lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. So, James, if you wouldn't mind touching a little bit on your Air Force career, but specifically, how did that translate and lead in a way to your wine career?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it had a direct influence, and you wouldn't match the connection between flying helicopters in the Air Force and starting and owning a winery. There doesn't seem a linkage, but there is directly. And then the first influence, as I mentioned in your previous question, with us not growing up with wine, we both got exposed to wine for the first time in college. So my first real, I would say, formal exposure to wine was at the Air Force Academy. We used to have officer etiquette classes, and you need to learn how to sit at a proper dinner table and set the proper setting and function in these formal environments. And of course, how to order wine and how to serve wine and drink wine and those type of things. So that was my first exposure to this idea of formality with a beverage. Now, we don't stay too formal in our winery right now, but that concept was still important as we went through this process. So then subsequently, I graduated. My first permanent flying assignment was in Vandenberg Air Force Base, California, which is in the Central Coast area, just outside of Lompoc and Santa Maria, San Ynez, Santa Barbara area, Paso Robles, this Central Coast wine growing region. And at the time, it was kind of the up and coming hot region in wine. And people are really kind of pioneering Maverick style, what was going on in California wine down in Central Coast. And, that was a time when, I'm young, don't make a lot of money. I'm newly married with no kids. And us and our friends used to go wine tasting a lot. It was a really fun, cheap activity to be able to go, take $30, you go buy some cheese, a loaf of bread, and, go wine tasting. You spend a couple dollars, if even pay anything for your tastings back then. Go grab a bottle of wine, sit at a picnic table somewhere, and have a fantastic afternoon. And the more and more I got into it, the deeper I started studying the history, the people behind it, the stories, how it had influence on society and politics and religion and all these different aspects. And I started meeting more winemakers and winery owners and really kind of getting geeked out a little bit on meeting these people. And they seemed like mini celebrities to me at the time. There's so few of them today that we're still in awe of, but of course there are still people in our industry that we are in awe of, both from their current perspectives as well as those historical. But at the time, I just got to learn more and more about it. And as I'm flying my helicopters during the week as well, we're getting to fly around the same terrain that we are growing these grapes in. And so you get a unique perspective when you would go into the taste room and they would speak about something like the diurnal shift and what the marine layer does and all these kind of concepts where they would be describing it from the ground. But I say, I get that from the air. And I understand the weather patterns that you're referring to and how that affects what we do flying and now how that affects the grapes. And I love the contrast there between what we did and what they did and how they intersected in nature. And I think that's just some of the foundations of what made me love wine. Now, as we fast forward 25 years later, I think a lot of that, training aspect of the military still translates as well in operating and running a business. And I think most importantly, where people miss the connection is running a team. I'm not involved in the day-to-day technical aspects of winemaking, not that I don't understand them or I couldn't. We did a lot of technical training in the Air Force and that's great, but really what it's about is leading a team and putting together that team and building operations. And, that's what I love doing out here. We have a fantastic team out here in Denver. We've got about 12 people or so on the team right now. And we love building it. We love training them. And we love it when we get that feedback online. And the feedback is, your service is fantastic. Your staff is fantastic. I almost love that more than when they say the product is fantastic. Of course, we want the wine to be great as well, but the people behind it are what's important. And I learned a lot of that in the Air Force.
Oh, that's great. That's a great answer and great insight, a little bit into your background. All right, your turn. What do you got for me next?
Okay. So Mark, obviously we spend a lot of time from our perspective creating a guest experience for others. That's one of the things we pride ourselves the most in our winery. Obviously, we have to have great wine, and winemaking has to be on the forefront. But creating a customer experience is 1A for us. There's got to be a great customer experience with the great wine. And a lot of that was developed by us, that we were consumers before we were winery owners. And both of us, independently and together, spent a lot of time traveling and going to different wineries and seeing what we liked and didn't like. So I want to get a little feedback from you from a customer perspective, not as a owner-operator perspective, but from a customer perspective. What were some of your best and worst experiences going in and tasting wine at other places?
Oh, wow. It's interesting you bring that up because I think about how we operate as a winery and specifically how I operate here in the taste room. And so many of my philosophies are based upon what I learned from other wineries about what I liked and how they operated, and also what I didn't like and how they operated. And I think it's, in a lot of ways equally important and equally influential into how I interact with my guests and my philosophy of hospitality. And I could tell you, one of the biggest aspects for me is the idea of trying to draw a connection with the customer, with the guest, and trying to relay stories. What I don't like when I go wine tasting is getting a sales pitch. What I don't like when I go shopping for wine, when I visit wineries, is hearing a rehearsed script. Because for me, wine, like, this concept behind this talk show, wine really opens up conversation. And, there's something about drinking wine with friends, with family, with strangers, that it just, inspires this idea of connection. And I want to make connections with my visitors, with my guests. So when I go to wine tasting rooms and I can tell the employee is just reading off a mental script, sometimes I'm a little turned off by that. I'm like, why can't we just talk? Answer my questions. I want to hear your story. I want to tell you my story. Let's chat. Let's connect. And that's really always been my philosophy. I can tell you one of the early jobs I had in the wine industry was working for Francis Ford Coppola's winery, which had a huge influence on me. And Francis Ford Coppola, as a filmmaker, obviously was a storyteller. And his philosophy about basically how to sell his wine, don't sell the wine, sell the story. And his theory, and my theory, because of his influence on me, is if the wine is not good enough to sell itself, there's nothing I can say to sell it to you. So I'm not trying to convince you to like my wine. You're going to like it, hopefully, or maybe you're not going to like it. But my goal is to create a memory, to create an experience. I want every guest that comes into our tasting room to walk out feeling like they made a connection with Mark Blanchard. They made a connection with Blanchard Family Wines. And, I'd like to think that it shows. We have had fans and customers and wine club members that have been with us from years, and they really start to feel at a certain point like family. And to me, that is priceless. Selling a bottle of wine here and there is important, but making that level of connection with someone that becomes, from a customer to a fan to really kind of part of a family, that's something really special.
I love that, Mark. Okay. Shoot, what do you got next?
All right, so what's my next question here? So I'm sitting here in our taste room, and as I mentioned, Healdsburg, Sonoma County, California, where it all began. But a couple years ago, we decided to expand to where you are sitting, James. You have a virtual backdrop behind you, but that is, of course, a real image of our winery in downtown Denver. So those of you that don't know, we expanded to Colorado a couple years ago. And of course, James runs the operation there in Colorado. And I remember when we initially came up with this idea, we're going to expand to Colorado, so many of my peers here in California had the question I'm about to ask you. Why Colorado? Why Denver? What is it about that area that you thought this is where we should grow, opposed to just trying to grow here in California wine country? So James, why Colorado?
Yeah, good question, Mark. So there's both a personal and a business reason behind it. Let's frankly, from a personal standpoint, I spent a lot of my Air Force career here in Colorado. Between when I went to school at the Air Force Academy, I taught at the Air Force Academy. I went to grad school at UC Boulder, or CU Boulder. I spent 6 years up at FE Warren Air Force Base in Cheyenne, Wyoming. I was living in Fort Collins at the time. So I spent a large amount of my adulthood in Colorado, and I just love it here. I love the weather, the terrain, the people, the town. I love everything about Denver and Colorado in general. So when I retired, I stayed here. My children, my second child was born here. My first child, Jackson, practically was born here. He was less than a year when we moved here. So this was home for me. And as I retired from the Air Force and wanted to expand the company, for me, I wanted to stay at home. And so now obviously the market has to match that passion too. If I lived in a place where it didn't work, we wouldn't have started the business here. But from a business standpoint, what I saw in Denver was that it is a fantastic food city, but it's still a young, blossoming food city. It doesn't have the legs of New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Miami, Chicago. It's not there yet, but it's well on its way. And it's been known, it's been a meat and potatoes town. It's a steak town for a long time. Obviously, Denver and Colorado in general was a cow town. And breweries are obviously very popular here. We are one of the microbreweries capitals of the country, and we make some great beer out here. And distilleries are on the rise, and there were a few wineries out here, but wine was really a step behind beer and spirits out here in Colorado. Yet there's a lot of California transplants out here, and being a steak town, obviously, wine should be going with the steak, and it's just not right now. And there's a lot of reasons behind it. the Colorado wine industry, it's not new. It's been around almost as long as the California wine industry. In fact, some of the great California founders are also the same Colorado founders as well. There's a lot of connection between the Colorado wine industry and the California wine industry as far as who the players are. But there's a climate difference here. There's a geography difference here. There are some challenges growing out here. And one of the bigger challenges at the main Colorado wine region is about 3.5 to 4 hours away from the population center, which is very different than out where you're at in Sonoma, where you could be in San Francisco in an hour. And so the money and the population is only an hour away from where wine country is. That's a big difference than 4 hours away, and a big difference when it's cold and windy and a little snow on the ground as well, and you don't want to drive 4 hours. So, and our idea was, well, let's bring our California experience to Denver. Let's bring what we make in California, that experience we have, that wine country feel, the customer experience base you just talked about, and let's bring it to Denver and share that wine with people. And that was our initial intent. We've done so. We typically have about 8 of our California wines on the menu here. We serve them off tap and in bottle. We do tasting flights. We create a lot of that experience here in a little bit laid back experience. It's not quite the one-on-one experience you do. It's more of a laid back wine bar experience, but people do tastings and they learn about our wine. It's been fantastic. However, after we opened for about a year, I started realizing we have a few holes in our portfolio. We didn't make a sparkling wine. We don't make any sweet white wines. And so we needed some things. So I went out to see if I could find some Colorado wines to fill the gap. And we found some fantastic ones. And then I found some more fantastic ones. And then I went out to Colorado wine country and I found some more fantastic ones. And we've continued to grow our portfolio of Colorado wines as well as our California wines to taste them side by side. And I would venture to guess right now, we probably are about a 60-40 split. We're selling about 60% California wine and 40% Colorado wine. And people not only want to come in and just experiment and try, which I love, but the Colorado wines are good. Certainly, we don't believe they're quite as good as California yet, but they're well on their way. And so we've created an experience here where people can try things. And you talked earlier, Mark, about that open-mindedness concept. We want to do that for people, whether it's opening their mind to California Chardonnay and Merlots that they've closed themselves off to because some Hollywood reason has told them to, or they're closed off to Colorado wine because they had a bad experience or someone told them it was not any good. So we've kind of expanded in that direction, and we'll see where it goes. We are currently looking to continue to expand our Colorado operation, hopefully make some Colorado wine this year, if not very soon, and continue to grow our footprint. We hope to always be a dual location winery between California and Colorado and kind of bridge that gap of products and education. But, we love what we're doing in California. We love what we're doing in Colorado, and we hope to, just continue to bring the best of both of them.
I love it. And, it's been amazing the last couple of years since we expanded to Colorado. Like I said, so many of my peers here in California sort of had this why, curiosity. Is that going to work? And now those same friends in the wine industry that were skeptics in questioning it a couple of years ago, frankly, now are a little jealous of what we've accomplished and what we've done. And I wonder if there's not going to be, a little bit of movement in California where certain wineries like ourselves recognize the potential of expanding outside of wine country. I've always said it's great when people come to wine country, but if we can bring wine country to people, even better.
Well, hopefully we can find our key property before the Kendall Jackson family comes in and starts buying up all the property out here. So
exactly. All right. What's your last question for me, James?
Okay. So, Mark, you've had quite a journey in the wine industry so far. You talked about how you work for Coppola. Obviously, working for Francis Ford Coppola, you're going to have some interesting guests in there. You've had some great celebrities that you've told me about working at Coppola. From what I remember, I think Coppola is where you might have had Kobe Bryant, the late Kobe Bryant, as well as Arnold Schwarzenegger come in. You've talked to me about a winery you worked at called Fleury Estate, where you're one of our childhood idols, Mark Grace, came in and had a fantastic experience with you. I think Brian Gumboldt was in there with you. You've also had a lot of other people in the movie industry. Oddly enough, a lot of high-ranking military officials that have been in these different wineries, business leaders. It's been a lot of fun for you. So I want you to kind of relate to me Tell me, kind of in your juiciest story here, what is your best celebrity tasting you've done? What group have you brought in that has probably impacted you the most as a winery owner?
Well, you're right. It's been one of these sort of surprising joys of my career and my job of pouring wine for a living, that I have met sports stars and movie stars and rock stars. I've literally had rock stars sitting at the table that I'm sitting at right now. I am a huge Golden State Warriors basketball fan. I've met something like 7 or 8 different Golden State Warriors players over the years through wine events I've done. Maybe my favorite celebrity, I met Bill Murray in an airport when I was traveling for the winery, as he tried to steal some wine from me at the baggage claim one time. But I'm going to flip this on you a little bit here, James, because I can go on and on dropping names of different celebrities that I've met, some of which have been in this room. But honestly, the most memorable guests that I've ever had are oddly not celebrities. So, I started, when you asked me the question, immediately I started thinking, rattling off like, okay, what's the coolest story of a famous person that came in the winery? And my brain went in a different direction. And I started thinking, the coolest story of someone that's come into this tasting room that I'm sitting in right now is actually not a famous person. But it was the most memorable and the most amazing experience I had. And so I'll tell you a quick story here. So a few years ago, when we used to throw events in the winery, remember when, parties and events were a thing that people did, right? Remember those good old days? Well, we used to throw these great events in the tasting room here. And we used to do this yearly event called Barrel Tasting Weekend. It was this big area-wide event, and like 100 wineries participated, and 10,000 people showed up to the town and go to these different wineries. And we did this event multiple years in a row and just brought great crowds into the winery. It was always a lot of fun. And a few years ago, it's a Saturday and Sunday event. A few years ago, it's right at the end of the Sunday. So we're talking about the end of a long 2-day event, right near close. This group of about 8 or 10 young girls come into the winery, and they're really nice, and they came in, they're tasting wine, they're hanging out in the barrel room. And I remember thinking at the time, like, hey, we're almost closed, and I'm going to be as polite as possible, but it's been a long weekend, it's time to wrap things up. But they were just having so much fun, and they seemed to be just so happy to be not just wine tasting, but wine tasting here. And they were taking pictures, and you could tell it was just this moment they were having. So I couldn't help myself but to engage. And I started chatting with them and just said, girls, you're having so much fun. Like, have you been here before? Have you heard of our wine? You're taking all these pictures here. Clearly it was a special moment for them. So one of the girls in the group proceeded to tell me a story that I was not prepared for at the time. And she proceeded to tell me the story about how this particular group of girls had been coming to this barrel tasting event for multiple years in a row. So every year they traveled to wine country, they got together as a group of friends, they went out for barrel tasting weekend. And the year before, they had come to our winery. They had come here and they had tasted. And they apparently just had the best time of the entire weekend. Apparently our winery was their favorite stop. But particularly, there was one girl in the group who just fell in love with the experience she had at Blanchard Family Wines. And this girl proceeded to tell me the story about how that girl had passed away from cancer just a few months prior to that. And how that group of friends decided that they were going to still get together, and they were still going to go on their yearly girl wine tasting trip for barrel tasting weekend. And they were going to go back to Blanchard Family Wines, the only winery that they went back to from previous years was our winery, because it was her favorite. And they came here to pay tribute to her and to take pictures and remember her and remember the experience they had had the previous year with her. And I said, I wasn't ready for that story. And it touched me. It broke me, really. I started crying, and they started crying. And I stayed open late with them. And we were tasting wine, and they were telling me about their friend who had passed away. And it was really emotional. And as they were leaving, and as I was saying goodbye to them, what those of you who are watching can't tell is above me on the wall behind me is a TV that plays a slideshow. It's just our taste room slideshow, and it has over 100 just random photos from years of parties and events and winemaking and different things that we have done, and it just runs on a loop of all these different photos. And as these girls are walking out the door, out of the corner of my eye, I notice a photo on the slideshow that I had forgotten was on the slideshow. And it was a photo of that group of girls that I took from the previous year. And I didn't even remember that it was on the slideshow. And I realized that I had taken a picture of this group with their friend who had passed away the previous year. And I only realized it as they were walking out the door. And I lost it. It was such a moment of realizing how lucky we are, James, how lucky you and I are that, we get to meet celebrities. We get to meet cool, famous people at the winery. But what really impacts me is stories like that. It's connections like that. And those are the moments, and those are the guests that I'll never forget, that really make me realize this is why we do it. This is why we started Blanchard Family Wines, being able to make connections like that, being able to play the smallest role in someone else's memories and someone else's experiences is something that I think you and I should feel really blessed that we get to do.
Mark, that's a fantastic answer to the question, and obviously, a little twist from where I thought it was going to go. But you're right. That's some of our why. That's some of why we do this. We have been fortunate enough in the last 12 to 14 months during this time of COVID to host hundreds of virtual wine tasting events with thousands of people around the country, and we've been able to do it in a time when they're locked in their homes or quarantined. They haven't been able to see their family and friends and coworkers and get together and gather. And, they've just been a little bit isolated. And sometimes, just sharing a glass of wine with a loved one is what you need for the day. And, we're at a time right now where people are going through a lot of stress and a lot of mental health issues and just a lot of troubling times. And sometimes you just need to reach out and connect with someone and say hello and have a little cheers and just share what's going on with your day. And so thank you for taking that direction, Mark. It's a fantastic reason why we do this, why we started this winery, why we continue to keep pushing every day to bring our wine and our experience to our guests. So I think it's a great way to finish this first show. I can't wait to see where this goes, where this leads. This is your creation. I'm really excited about what kind of guests you have lined up and what stories they're going to share after a glass or two of wine. Who knows where it's going to go. There's going to be some laughs. There's going to be some tears. And I can't wait to see where you take this show, Mark.
Absolutely. So, the last thing I just want to leave everyone with, kind of piggybacking on what you're saying there, James, is, through COVID times, through the last 13 months, it's been challenging. It's been tragic for people. It's been hard for people. And I'm a silver lining guy. I always like to look at the positive. And I would say one of the great silver linings of the last 13 months is kind of what you and I are doing right now, and that's chatting on Zoom. And, you live in Colorado and I live in California. And over many years of running a business together, we talk on the phone, we text, we email. You come a couple times a year to California, I come a couple times a year to Colorado. We don't see each other that much. And a silver lining to COVID is that through Zoom, through virtual wine tastings we've done, through experiences like this, you and I have seen each other more in the last 13 months. Granted, virtually, but we've seen each other more in the last 13 months than we've seen each other maybe in the last 13 years, as far as the regular basis, the way that we've connected. And I feel like a weird silver lining of COVID times is it forced all of us to find creative ways to come together, find creative ways to connect. And I feel like wine, Blanchard Family Wines is meant to connect people. It's meant to bring people together. And I hope if there's any silver lining to the hardships we've all gone through in the last 13 months, it's that inspiration, that way that we've all been forced to find ways to connect and come together. So the last thing I want to leave everyone that is viewing this, the last little sentiment I want to leave you with here, and if James, you want to raise a glass and toast with me here. Thank you, James, for joining me. It was great to connect with you, but all of you at home, let's keep finding ways to come together. Let's keep finding ways to connect, and hopefully over a good glass of wine. This has been the first episode of Decanted, and I think we really opened up a great conversation. And I cannot wait for all of you at home to see future episodes. This is going to be a lot of fun. But until the next time, cheers. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
All right, James, you have a good night. We'll see you folks soon.
You too.